This conference will now be recorded.
All right, folks, so good evening. We are here this evening to review and go over and lecture on the endocrine system. Okay, so the endocrine system there, we're going to be talking about some of the fundamentals regarding the system. Know that each system that we are studying, you will need to know the basic functions of each of these systems, right? So that goes without saying that you need to know the basic functions of each of the systems in AMP1 and AMP2, as well as very much as far as the incidentals regarding what takes place as far as, so for the endocrine system, you'll need to understand the glands that are producing the hormones, what is the specific hormones that are being produced by these glands, the action of these hormones when they reach their target tissues, right? And then as far as pathology is concerned, whether we have too high levels or low levels, what's going to happen and how that will affect the human body as far as any type of diseases, processes are going on and taking place. Okay, so how it's affecting homeostasis present within the body. So let's take a look here and just look at the first. So this first slide here, right? So realizing that the endocrine system working in conjunction with the nervous system really helps to maintain homeostasis, this proper stable environment within the human body, right? Truly what we have going on is that the nervous system is very fast acting, the endocrine system would be, and the hormones, the chemicals that are being produced are usually more slow acting, other than in the case of say like epinephrine and norepinephrine, which can be very quick acting. Okay, and so they should be as far as preparing the body for action and such. Okay, you'll see here that the hypothalamus sends chemical signals to the pituitary, and I've said this to you in the past, and I'm going to reiterate this with you, that the pituitary gland would be considered the master gland of the endocrine system, and that the hypothalamus, the area anterior and inferior in present within the third ventricle of the brain, a very deep portion within the brain. This area of the brain is really the master controller of the pituitary gland. Yeah, you know, you have to, if your computer is freezing, if you're having issues with that, there's got to be an issue as far as making sure that you're connected to your Wi-Fi properly, or that there's not as many people on your Wi-Fi, or again, you could connect to your own Wi-Fi, connect to your actual router via some type of Ethernet cable. That can be very helpful. Or then you might also have to reach out to your provider, internet provider, and see what's going on with that as far as the speed of your internet. Know that there are funds available for you folks regarding the CARES Act. And so if you're having issues as far as with your computers, with a laptop, or with your Wi-Fi, you can get funding in order to help you with that. Okay, in order to help you purchase materials that would help you with your education, and Wi-Fi is one of them. So just know that that's there for you all. As far as these endocrine glands are concerned, you'll recall that in AMP number 1, right, AMP 1, we talked about glands, as far as we talked about epithelial tissue and the production of glands, and that there are exocrine and endocrine glands. So exocrine glands, we're thinking of like a sweat gland, an oil-producing gland, a sebaceous gland, right? These would be having ducts. They'd actually have tubes that would then release their secretions through the tubes, right, through these ducts. Whereas endocrine glands, right, send their secretions, their chemical messengers to into the bloodstream and to the target tissues present within the body. And again, know that the hormones that are being produced are sent to throughout the body, right, via the cardiovascular system, and that the tissues of the body need to have specific receptors for those specific chemicals, these hormones, in order to produce some type of action. Very important for you to understand that and to see that. You'll see here, as far as endocrine and nervous system working close together, I said this before, and see here as far as that the endocrine system producing these hormones, these chemical messengers that are going to be sent throughout the body to create change in areas where there are these specific receptors, whereas in the nervous system, we have these fast-acting action within the nervous system and in the nerves, the neurons in the nerves that are going to whatever area of the body and sending very quick messages, which will in turn have a quick action. But it's not very long-lasting as far as the effect is concerned, whereas in the endocrine system, the effect can last for extended periods of time. Here, this is just one nice image that you'll see regarding and showing you different structures that are present within the human anatomy that would produce hormones. Not all of them are represented here, but primarily these specific endocrine glands that you're seeing here that are part of different systems and such. But know that other areas of the body are also producing hormones, not just these areas in particular that you see in this image. So function-wise, right? So function-wise, along with the nervous system, the endocrine system, responsible for maintaining this homeostasis. And really, this is the key here, is precise regulation. So realize that when your hormone levels are off, in particular, there's many people having issues with their thyroid hormone, right? And their thyroid glands not producing enough or producing too much. Really having those levels not being at the correct levels where they need to be can really cause havoc to the actual functioning of the whole body as far as all systems. We would say that thyroid hormone is a major metabolic hormone, so it affects multiple systems and really can affect multiple functions present within the body, maintaining homeostasis. So metabolism, tissue maturation, ion regulation, water balance, right? Immune system regulation, heart rate, blood pressure regulation, control of blood glucose levels and other nutrients present within the digestive tract that need to be processed for the body to function well. Control of reproductive functions, uterine contractions, and milk release. You see, these are some of the major functions that the endocrine system, via the hormones that are being produced, send to specific areas of the body that have specific receptors for these chemicals, for these hormones, to create some type of action. I know that really, just as we've said right in AMP1, negative feedback is really the way that the body primarily maintains homeostasis. And so if you have too much of a hormone, well, then there'll be inhibiting hormones that'll be released that will calm the production of and release of that hormone that there are too much levels, right? So if the thyroid hormone levels are up high, right, because you'll have thyroid hormone continually circulating throughout the body, right? That's one of those hormones that's continually being produced. But if levels get too high, then the body can, through negative feedback mechanisms, reduce the amount that's being circulated. So you see here, as far as thermostat for turns on the furnace in regarding body temperature, and we know that the hypothalamus acts really as the thermostat in the body and can also work to release or not release hormones and create an environment where we can actually lower the temp or increase the temp. And there are mechanisms that can take place in order to do this here. But again, negative feedback is how this is primarily done. You'll see here that we have these modified amino acids, we have these proteins, steroids, so think cholesterol and such that are, lipids are involved in this as far as, and also cholesterol in creating these steroids, and estrogen is one of them. Know that these have different mechanisms of creating some type of change and reaching the specific receptors that are needed for these hormones, these chemicals, in order to make an action, to create some type of action. Because some of these hormones will actually enter into the cell and they'll interact with the nucleus and interact in the cytoplasm of the cell with the receptors. Or other hormones will actually more interact on the plasma membrane. There are receptors that would be present and would work as a result of what's called a G protein mechanism, where they would interact outside of the cell with these receptors and then cause change within the cell. Okay, so think in terms of water soluble hormones and such. Now here we're looking at, as far as there are different chemicals that are being released and produced within the human body. Okay, so you'll need to know these terms as far as know that what does an autocrine represent, a paracrine represent. These two in particular keep together. And then also there are pheromones. We've heard of this before as far as secreted into the environment, modify behavior and physiology and be released into the air that can, in particular, you're thinking of sex pheromones for animals in particular, that can release these, that can affect the opposite of the species as far as the male or the female and cause actions to take place and occur. Neurohormones, you're thinking in terms of produced by actual nervous tissue and function like hormones. So know that oxytocin is produced within the actual hypothalamus, but it's actually then released to the posterior pituitary, the neural hypophysis. And so not produced by the neural hypophysis, the posterior pituitary, but produced by also nervous tissue within the brain, that hypothalamus. And think also of the adrenal medulla and epinephrine, norepinephrine, also neurohormones produced and released by nervous tissue present within the adrenal glands. So this autocrine and paracrine, okay, so you're thinking of chemicals that have a local effect. So they're released by cells and have an action on the same cell area where they're being released. So think in terms of like prostaglandins would be produced and released in areas of tissue damage. So no matter where this might be, some type of damage, infection. And so right where the damage and the infection is taking place, cells in that area will release prostaglandins. They'll release these autocrine types of secretions that will have an effect right locally, right there, okay? Paracrine, we're talking about something like somatostatin. So this is a growth hormone inhibiting hormone, okay? AKA also known as, let me put that down there. Okay. Growth hormone inhibiting hormone. And so this will have an action that will affect not just right where the area where these hormones where these cells are being affected, but locally close to other cells that are in the area. Autocrine, so same cells, paracrine, cells very close within the area and causing some type of an effect to occur, okay? And again, like I said, mentioned to you about the pheromones and the neurohormones. Now, as far as secretion rate is concerned, so how quickly and how the volume at which the hormones are being produced and released, okay? So one, factors that are involved here. So the action of the substance, right, which is not a hormone. So say the effect of glucose on insulin. And so we know that glucose levels, right, when they're high, insulin is released in order to help allow for glucose to enter into the cells, okay? So that's one mechanism as far as the action of a substance that's not the hormone causing the release of more insulin in response to high levels of glucose, say after you've eaten, okay? The effect of the nervous system, so in the role of stress for production of adrenaline, AKA epinephrine, norepinephrine, right? So if your body is under some type of stress and you start stimulating the sympathetic nervous system, what's going to happen? But those neurohormones, those neurochemicals are going to be released into the body and aid in the actual handling of whatever that stressful situation may be. And the effect of hormonal secretion of another endocrine gland. So you'll see here as far as releasing hormones, so thyroid releasing hormones and stimulating hormones produced by other glands that will in turn cause some type of an effect. They're called tropic hormones. These tropic hormones will then cause another gland to release another hormone, which will in turn have an effect. And you'll see here as far as, so we have hormones being released by the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and then the thyroid gland releasing T3 and T4, these types of thyroid hormone, okay, being released. So tropic hormones, we call them, TROPIC. All right, so endocrine glands can change their secretion over time. So as far as chronic hormone regulation, acute and cyclic, right? So think cyclical, think the female reproductive hormones, and we won't really touch upon what's going on as far as ovarian and uterine cycles until we get to at the end of the semester regarding female and reproductive anatomy and physiology and such. But know that these hormones are present, and they'll have time periods of they spike and then they reduce, and then there'll be steady periods of release and such. Cyclical. Okay. As far as acute situation there, so epinephrine, norepinephrine in response to stress, absolutely, right? And then chronic regulation, chronic hormone regulation, as far as you'll see here, as far as relative constant concentration of thyroid hormone present within the body, again, because it's a major metabolic hormone, and understand that and keep this in mind, that when we have too much thyroid hormone, it's as if you have a sports car and you have a gas pedal, and you put your foot to the floor on the gas pedal, and you're revving, and things are at, the body is functioning at a very accelerated rate, okay? Or in the case of hypothyroidism, so that's hyperthyroidism, right? Hypothyroidism, it's as if you just have your foot on the gas pedal just enough just to get by, so you're moving. Like, so when you're going 25 miles an hour on a road and you feel like, okay, I feel like I'm standing still. That's hypothyroidism. It's really like all the body systems have kind of slowed down, and you're functioning at a slow motion type basis there. Okay, so major metabolic hormone as far as thyroid hormone is concerned. But know that we have these chronic, acute, and cyclical regulation of the different hormones, these chemical messengers present. Ah, Jasmine, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, indeed, that's a tough one. Yeah, indeed. So transport and distribution, okay? So know that here as far as, so we're seeing here as far as that some hormones, right, as hormones dissolve into the blood plasma to the liquid portion of the blood, okay? They're either bound or unbound to plasma proteins. And plasma proteins contribute to the overall solute level present within the blood in order to maintain the liquid present within the blood, right? We'll talk about this more when we talk about the urinary system, but know that depending upon where the blood is flowing through and such, we don't want all of the liquid portion of the blood to leave the cardiovascular system. That would be not a good thing, right? Imbalances within the maintaining that fluid level within the cardiovascular system can affect blood pressure, can affect the fact where we have present within the body as far as edema is concerned, and the lower extremities in particular, right? So plasma proteins play a role as far as solute concentration, solutes present within the blood. So blood cells, absolutely, they play a part in that, as well as these plasma proteins produced in the liver and released into the blood. Now, know that, like I said here, as far as these hormones are concerned, they can either be unbound or bound to these plasma proteins as far as they travel in the blood to their target tissues. Okay? Now, these unbound free hormones, right, can diffuse from the plasma into the interstitial fluid and affect cells. So know that, throughout your whole body, there is liquid inside of the cells, there's liquid outside of the cells, there's liquid outside of the tissues. Know that if you were to open up the body, right, it's not dry, right? There's liquid present, okay? And it needs to, so I've mentioned this before, and I know I did an AMP1 regarding tissues that are exposed to the outside environment. If they're exposed to the outside environment, they need to be dry. They're really, so in case of the epidermis, right? Stratified squamous epithelial tissue, keratinized, meaning the outer layer that's exposed to the environment, dead cells, right? Filled with, the cytoplasm is replaced with keratin, right? How about the hair? Your hair is dead, right? The root at the follicle level itself, that's alive, right? Those are live cells, but they're pushing out the dead hair, and that's what's surrounding, but it's connected to at the follicle level also to nerves, in order that we can feel if something is moving on our skin, right? We get that as far as those sensory receptors and such. But know that Anything that's exposed to the outer external environment, it's dry, dead. If it's moist, say in your nasal cavity, in your oral cavity, right? We have saliva, we have mucus present in order to, yeah, good. There you go, Norma. Avascular, right? As far as the epithelial tissue is all avascular. So know that then anything that's exposed to the environment that is not covered in some type of liquid, protected that way, dead cells, right? But live cells, absolutely, they're present, and the oral cavity, nasal cavity, some type of mucus or saliva, and they are live cells. Well, so here, as far as, like I said, as far as this interstitial fluid, this fluid is present inside of the body and allowing for there to be moisture present and such. And know that at the capillary level, right? So when we're thinking as far as the arteries, the arterioles, capillaries, the venules, the veins, well, the capillaries are where diffusion takes place, where oxygen and CO2 are exchanging, where nutrients are moving back and forth and exchanging. And know that at the capillary level, some of the liquid of the blood, the liquid portion, the plasma, will leak out of the capillaries and enter into this fluid that is present outside of the tissues. And then what will happen is that there are lymphatic vessels that will suck up, take up a portion of this liquid and allow then for that part of your body to actually do an immunosurveillance and looking for any type of microorganisms or anything that could quite possibly make you sick. Okay, and so that's a part of your immune function working with the cardiovascular system and the white blood cells, the leukocytes. Okay, so again, unbound free hormones, they diffuse right from the plasma and into the interstitial fluid, affecting cells and tissues that are surrounding throughout the body. Right, the hormones bound to plasma proteins play a role of reservoir for the hormone. Okay, so they're holding on to the hormone and allowing for there to be a release or not release. They tend to maintain consistent levels in the blood for longer periods of time. So there's this balance. And just isn't this true that present within the human body, there's this delicate balance throughout all different conditions that can be measured and that can be controlled, maintained by the nervous system as well as the endocrine system. Now, this is a very important statement right here, and hence I highlighted it, and it's in bold print and it's underlined, okay? Lipid-soluble hormones diffuse through capillary cells. Water-soluble hormones need pores in the walls of the capillaries called fenestrae. And you're gonna see this come back at us as far as in the urinary system and thinking about these different, well, in cardiovascular as well as urinary system. As far as capillaries, there are different types of capillaries, and some have pores and some have larger openings or smaller openings, let's put it that way. And really know that the lipid soluble can diffuse through the capillary cells. Again, too, realizing that plasma membrane throughout what we're talking about here, as far as no matter where it is, as far as in the tissues of the body, lipid soluble pass right through. But it's water soluble that will need, as far as these openings, these fenestrae, these pores, windows, openings, or they'll need, in the case of the plasma membrane, specific protein channels. And we know that already as far as that water soluble chemicals cannot do this. Okay, not just pass through as lipid soluble can. Now, in the case of half-life, okay, so maybe many of you have been exposed at some level to in the chemistry classes and such, in the introductory chemistry, as far as radioactivity and thinking of half-life as far as radioactivity is concerned, and radioactive decay, right? Changes. Well, here you're thinking this half-life as far as the chemicals are concerned. So the length of time it takes a half a dose of a substance, right, a chemical of this hormone, to be eliminated from the circulatory system, from the cardiovascular system. Right? Now, know that here, as far as long half-life or short half-life, long half-life, you're thinking lipid-soluble hormones bound to plasma proteins. In the opposite case, you're thinking of short half-life, you're thinking of water-soluble hormones. You're thinking of epinephrine, norepinephrine, and other chemicals that will, other hormones that we'll discuss, that do not bind to plasma proteins, and so they are going to have a not as long of an effect as those that are lipid soluble, okay? Because of their longer half-life or shorter half-life. We know this as far as epinephrine, norepinephrine, right? Yes, it causes very quick, very fast change to take place within the body as far as getting you ready for action, either run or fight, right? But it doesn't last for very long. Okay? Shorter half-life. You'll see here, as far as this is interesting, as far as down and up regulation regarding actual specific receptors for specific hormones, okay? So normally the receptor molecules are changing accordingly. So if we need to have more of an action as a result of a hormone being released in the body, then there could be the number of receptors can increase, which would be called upregulation. Or if the opposite effect would need to take place, the number of receptors may decrease, and this can be called a downregulation, and this can be reducing the effect of the hormone circulating. More receptors, more response to the hormone. Less receptors, a diminished response, an inhibited response to the hormone, okay? And I mentioned to you this earlier there regarding membrane bound or intracellular. So intracellular, inside of the cell, right? This would be lipid soluble, and some that are very small size molecules will enter actually into the cell and cause their effect. Whereas membrane bound, we're looking at water soluble or larger sized hormones that can't directly enter into the cell, but they can interact with receptors on the plasma membrane and via this G protein effect, can cause change to take place within the cell. Let's do this for a moment here. I'm going to stop what I'm doing right at the moment here. Okay. So just take a moment, breathe a little bit here, and just ask you all: Are you doing okay? It's a lot of information. Like I said, this is when we come together for lecture, giving you a lot of information in a relatively short period of time. That's why you go back, you review the videos, you go back, you review your PowerPoint, you take notes from your PowerPoint, take notes from the videos. You should always be, as you're listening to the lecture being given, you're taking notes so that you can write down the important information that's not actually stated here on the PowerPoints themselves, right? So it's important to do that. And like I said, it's also important to vary what you do. So, doing the homework in Cengage, right? So you should be each chapter that we go over. So from chapter 12 to the end of this semester, you'll be going to Cengage, and I know I sent out a specific email regarding this, but you'll be taking the actual, I don't know, in your case for this textbook, I forget if it's called a quiz or a test. I'm sorry, because depending upon the textbook, they'll call it a quiz or they'll call it a test in Cengage, but it's at the end of the Cengage material, and you'll take that, and that's going to be submitted to me, and that'll count towards lab report grade, okay? Test yourself. Okay, thank you, Nicole. I appreciate that. Yeah, again, like I said, I teach from different classes, and so some call it a quiz, some call it a test, but know that that's what's being brought over. Anything else that's present within Cengage, you have the time, if you can, do the material, do that stuff, review that information as far as in the MindTap. I'm not going to take that information over as far as grade-wise is concerned, but know that test questions are taken from the Cengage material, okay? As far as like specific type of questions can be taken from that material, right? So it's a good idea to do some of the work at least. But again, I only require that in this case for this class, test yourself, and that's what I would submit. That's what I will submit as far as grade-wise for the class, okay? All right. Let's hide everyone and continue sharing our PowerPoint with everybody. So I said to you all that the hypothalamus, this is the portion of the brain that actually is the master controller of what takes place as far as the really, we think the autonomic nervous system, right? Because the autonomic nervous system, we're working with the nervous system as well as the endocrine system to control the different functions present within the body to maintain homeostasis. Right? And so the hypothalamus is controlling the secretions of the pituitary gland, and I said to you that that's the master gland. Okay? We know that the pituitary gland would be called the hypophysis. So let's just write down that term. And then we know that we have anterior pituitary is the adeno, and the posterior pituitary is the neurohypophysis. All right, so please, if you have a chance and you want to make notation of that and such. So we call the pituitary gland the hypophysis. Know that the extension of the pituitary gland, we call it the pituitary stalk, or also called the infundibulum, two terms that we use for that. That's what's actually going to connect and allow for communication to take place between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Very important, okay? So that so this is just the portion of the extension of the hypothalamus to the hypophysis, right? Is that infundibulum, also known as the pituitary stalk. Okay. Nerve cells produce chemical signals, releasing hormones, releasing inhibiting hormones, controlled by negative feedback system from the endocrine system. So letting the brain know that, hey, we have higher levels, lower levels, what needs to take place as far as stimulatory and inhibitory hormones being released. So the hypophysis, right? So very small, right? Very small as far as its area there. And where is this located again? It's the sella turcica, right? So the sella turcica is that anterior cranial region there. So let's look at as far as so the sella. Okay, so you see anterior, you see middle, and you're not seeing the posterior. So here we go, this one. Okay, so anterior, we have here the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone and cristogali. Here we have the, as far as in the middle cranial region here, we have, and this one is a little bit, yeah, here we go. Trying to see if we can't make this for you. All right. So anterior cranial fossa, middle cranial fossa, and posterior cranial fossa. So when we were in lab, we looked at the fact that cristogali, cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone, and the anterior cranial fossa. Middle cranial fossa, we want you to focus on sella turcica. So this right here, that Turkish saddle, that's what that term means, it represents, and this is where it's being protected. I'm going to show you a lateral view to give you a little bit more of a different view regarding what's taking place as far as the sphenoid bone is concerned. And sphenoid bone is this wing-shaped, odd-looking bone, right? And then we have here as far as occipital bone and the foramen magnum. So let's take a look as far as lateral view is concerned. There we go. Again, I'll just make this bigger. And let's make, no, it's not going to make it bigger. Okay, well, a little bit bigger. So you see here, as far as this area here, this is the cella turcica right there, and you'll see how we have here the anterior and posterior pituitary, the adenohypophysis, the neurohypophysis, and know that. So adenohypophysis, this is glandular tissue. The posterior pituitary is nervous tissue, okay? As far as the origins are different. And you'll see here as far as hypothalamic region, right in through in here, and know that we're connected by this, the infundibulum, aka the pituitary stalk. All right. So, and I mentioned this just a moment ago there regarding really the posterior pituitary. It's nervous tissue, an extension of the nervous system. Okay, the hypothalamus in particular, and really that's where the origin of the nervous tissue, as far as in fetal development, this would be embryonic development. Really, it's the extension of the hypothalamus, that posterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary, again, glandular, right, in origin. And you'll see here as far as developed from the roof of the mouth, right? And this really, anterior pituitary is producing many hormones and releasing many hormones, whereas posterior pituitary is not producing any hormones. It's only releasing hormones that have been produced by the hypothalamus and sent to the neurohypophysis. So you'll see here as far as neurohormones, again, produced by the nervous system, produced by hypothalamic neurons, okay, via the portal system present within the hypothalamus. And you'll see here as far as these are blood vessels that are sending chemicals to the anterior and the posterior pituitary system here, okay, as far as those each individual glands. So you'll see here somatotropin, this term for growth hormone. Remember we said somatostatin, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, GHIH. So GH, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH. You'll see here as far as beta endorphins and lipotropins, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, prolactin. We'll go into detail regarding some of these in particular, okay, as far as their actions and their control. And you'll see here as far as really with the female reproductive system, but also they have some role or no role at all that we haven't been able to figure out in the male reproductive system, but in the female reproductive system, all of these have some type of role. Like I said, we'll get into that in even more detail at the end of the semester. So you see here as far as growth hormone is concerned, right? So pretty much as it's stated, as far as growth hormone is concerned, you're thinking of, okay, so if we have the ability to stimulate production of more synthesis of the structures of the body and aiding in development. And know that the thyroid hormone helps and modulates with what goes on with growth hormone in order to produce a symmetry in the body so that one extremity is not greater than size than the other extremity. There are instances, and this is a condition called Proteus syndrome, which is actually quite a shocking type syndrome, illness. And what goes on regarding Proteus syndrome is that there is pretty much a strange event that occurs within the body that causes there to be an abnormal growth certain parts of the body. And really, it can be quite devastating, folks. You'll see here as far as, so folks, this is a hand. I know that's hard to see or to like realize that that's, but it's so deformed. You'll see here is this gentleman was the quote unquote poster person for a national organization for those that suffer with Proteus syndrome. And you'll see that there's this abnormal growth of different parts, body parts and such. And again, this is a devastating type of illness that can occur. They think that, I'm sure that you've probably heard of this, maybe this movie or not, but there was a man named John Merrick who sadly was called the Elephant Man, right? Which is like, that's horrible. But this was from the movie. This is actually the gentleman himself, and this is really what took place. As far as you'll see, uh, this arm here, yeah, it was quite a touching movie and such, and you know, he had not an easy life indeed, for sure. Yes, very sad. Um, yeah, understood that Andre the Giant. Yeah, so different type of situations here, but you'll see that this his one arm, right, really misshapen and such. One side of his face really misshapen, and the other side not as affected by it. So we believe that he might have suffered from Proteus syndrome and such, and so really quite remarkable, folks. Just to show you this image here and such, and you'll see. Now, they initially thought that he might have suffered from what's called neurofibromatosis. And there are different types of this neurofibromatosis, but this is neurofibromatosis more has to do with, yes, there are growths that are present. And I had, when I was in graduate school and working within the outpatient clinic, I had a patient who suffered from neurofibromatosis. And so this is the posterior aspect, the back, right, of the person's body and their skin. And these tumors are connected to the nervous system, hence the term neurofibromatosis. And these fibrous tumors are painful, right? And so imagine palpation, touching the body, that this can be uncomfortable. Yeah. Yeah, so there are many more people that suffer from this than you would expect, to be honest. It's not that uncommon, neurofibromatosis. And but they thought that at one time that John Merrick might have suffered from neurofibromatosis, but now as years have gone on and such, they believe that more than likely he suffered from Proteus syndrome. And so know that, like I said, not only growth hormone, but also thyroid hormone works in conjunction, works with each other in order to maintain symmetry within the body, one side and the other. So let's, okay. All right, so we are going to go a little bit longer in the presentation here as far as working with the PowerPoint, and I will complete the PowerPoint as well as review within lab and such, and also in next week as far as in lecture, pathologies on a more deeper level and such, okay? So you'll see here as far as know that if there's a lower level of growth hormone being produced, dwarfism can occur, okay? So very abnormally short stature, okay? And then in the case of somebody had mentioned in the chat there regarding Andre the Giant, so he not only suffered from gigantism, increased growth hormone output, but also from acromegaly, because once he started growing in height, so know that he didn't continue to grow taller and taller, right? But he did expand as far as in some areas of his body, as far as his forehead, his skull bones, his hands, his feet. And this is once the growth in height stops at puberty, right, post-puberty, but there's still growth taking place because there's still growth hormone being released. These are other areas of the body that can still increase in size as far as hands, feet, and skull bones and such, okay? So the peak of growth hormone levels are during deep sleep. Quite interesting, right? So, and could be a possible reason why those that are developing at puberty and growing seem to sleep longer during some certain periods of time where they're going through a growth spurt and such. Levels are lower at other times of the day. You'll see here these hormones. Thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates thyroid to release and to synthesize and release thyroid hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone for stimulating the adrenal cortex, which we'll look at next week as far as what's taking place at the zones, right? The zone of the glomerulosa, fasciculata, and the reticularis. Those three areas that I showed you as far as in the video and in lab, but I will go over endocrine histology in the lab, that area in particular is affected by and stimulates the release of the hormones that are produced there. Melanocyte stimulating hormone. So we're looking at stimulation of melanocytes, okay? And then you'll see here as far as follicle stimulating hormone, so FSH. So I said to you that some of these chemicals produced in both areas of the body as far as for both male and female, and having different effects because of the fact that, so in males, this follicle stimulating hormone would stimulate sperm cell production, right? As well as in the females, then this would actually, there are follicles that are present within the ovary that will help and enable the egg, right, to come to maturation and be released when luteinizing hormone, which is another hormone that you saw earlier there today, when that hormone spikes, that's when ovulation occurs, the release of the egg into the uterine tubes, aka the fallopian tubes, and then ready for possible fertilization and eventual implantation if that takes place. Endorphins and lipotropins. Okay, so you saw that earlier there, and you're like, well, what does that mean? So the endorphins you probably have heard of because acting as an analgesic, really your body's homemade analgesics that are present and are used for pain relief. Okay, so how about in times of stress, in times of physical activity? People can do things and put up with injuries and such at a level that you wouldn't think that they would be able to handle the pain and discomfort, but because of the fact that these endorphins, and there's another term, and enkephalons are also being produced and released, seem to help and have an analgesic effect. The lipotropins, causing adipose cells to catabolize fat, meaning a breakdown of fat. Okay? So all derived from the same large precursor molecule, like ACTH, like MSH. Okay? Here we have as far as, again, so you saw here as far as FSH is concerned, and primarily when people think of follicle stimulating hormone, excuse me, folks, when we're thinking of follicle stimulating hormone, you're thinking primarily of females and not males, but realizing that it does have an effect, it does have an action in the male reproductive system as far as for the actual testes themselves. And then also luteinizing hormone, okay? I said to you that when luteinizing hormone spikes as far as the levels it stimulates in its mid-cycle, it would, as far as uterine and ovarian cycles are concerned, at mid-ovarian cycle, it will allow for the release of the egg into the uterine tubes. And also stimulating progesterone production. And so this would make sense also because having luteinizing hormone at higher levels will enable their progesterone levels to increase, because once fertilization takes place and once we get to the second half of the ovarian cycle, we want the lining of the uterus, the endometrium, to be thicker, and progesterone will contribute to that. And then in males, as far as stimulating certain cells, specific cells present within the testes and such, in order to increase testosterone production and such. Okay? Now, prolactin. So when we hear this term prolactin, we're thinking in terms of prolactation, right? So stimulating milk production within the females. And so as far as prolactin is concerned, may decrease may cause a decrease in male sex hormones, that action. But for females, we know as far as a lactating female, this will stimulate milk production. Okay. Now, this posterior pituitary gland, the neural hypophysis, direct extension of the hypothalamus, I said to you that there, so it's nervous tissue. Hypothalamic neurons are descending into the posterior pituitary gland via this hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract, right? Present within the infundibulum, okay? This is that pituitary stalk. And secrete their neurohormones, which enter into the bloodstream and start moving toward their target tissues. So know that, again, the posterior pituitary is not synthesizing hormones. The hypothalamus is, and it's releasing it through the neurohypophysis. And the hormones that we're talking about there are oxytocin, right? So let's see here as far as an antidiuretic hormone. So you see here oxytocin and ADH, antidiuretic hormone. So just to give you a little bit of insight as far as for my health and such, so I have high blood pressure that's managed by a blood pressure medication, as well as medication that is a diuretic, which causes me to produce more urine, which would also cause there to be a decrease in the blood volume present within my body, and that'll decrease the blood pressure. So a diuretic, you increase more urine production. An antidiuretic, you're going to conserve water. So write this down. It's a water conserving hormone. ADH, it's an antidiuretic hormone, so it's a water conserving hormone. So as a result of conserving water, what is it doing? It's increasing water reabsorption in the kidney tubules. Okay. And this diabetes insipidus is quite a terrible illness in that you are producing a tremendous amount of urine. Like we're talking like 10, but I between 8 and 10 or so 2-liter bottles, right? So a 2-liter bottle, about 2-liter bottle of soda, right? Between 8 to 10 of those of urine per day that's actually leaving your body, diabetes insipidus. It's really, yeah, it is a wow type of a thing indeed, and it's not a good thing. Let me show you here as far as diabetes insipidus, ADH deficiency due to damage to the hypothalamus or to the posterior pituitary. Polyuria, meaning you're producing a high amount of urine. Polydipsia, you're very thirsty as a result of producing all this urine because it's all this water is leaving your body. So urine output can be as high as 19 liters. That's a crazy amount, folks. Now, ADH is also known as vasopressin because of the fact that it also, sure, absolutely, that is an important aspect of it. Maybe not so much because of diabetes insipidus, but other conditions that if your body is maintaining proper homeostasis, then you're not going to produce copious amounts of urine. Okay, but if you suffer from diabetes mellitus, if you're suffering from some type of diabetes, yes, absolutely. So there's going to be a higher urine output. There can also be issues with damage to the kidneys, and then there could be not only just output-wise changes, but also content-wise changes. You'll see here vasopressin is an AKA, also known as ADH, because what it'll do is it's also a vasoconstrictor. Okay, vasoconstrictor, and if we so ADH can act to increase blood pressure, right? And why would this be? Because it can actually do two mechanisms here. Increase your blood volume by conserving water, so that'll increase your blood volume, which will increase your blood pressure, and also the vasoconstriction aspect. So there are different blood pressure medications that can have an effect that would be vasodilators, which would in turn increase the lumen of a blood vessel. So I have my trusty paper towel here, right? And the inner portion of this paper towel, so say this represents some type of blood vessel, you'll see here as far as this would be the lumen of the blood vessel where the blood flows through. Well, that lumen, if we're having vasoconstriction, would have a smaller lumen, a narrowing effect of the lumen, whereas vasodilation would expand the lumen and lower blood pressure. Okay. So ADH. Oxytocin. Oxytocin has a role played within constriction of mammary glands and allowing for the actual release of milk, working with prolactin, working with the lactating female in order to be able to breastfeed. Okay, so milk ejection in lactating women, as well as working with, like I said, with prolactin. But one of the key issues here that when you think oxytocin, think as far as given during, so they would give a pitocin, right? an artificial type of oxytocin that would be involved in stimulating uterine contractions. So even know that uterine contractions during issues with premenstrual type syndrome and issues there, when you're having contractions taking place during that time of the month, if that occurs for you, again, we have oxytocin to blame for that. Okay? Know that oxytocin, the release of it for a woman who is going to be giving birth, this would be maintained via positive feedback, because once the head of the child is pushing up against the cervix, the more pressure that's put up against the cervix, then the stimulation will go back to the brain, and in particular to the hypothalamus. And then what's going to happen would be that more oxytocin is released, and the strength of contractions will increase, as well as the time will decrease between the contractions in order to birth the baby, as well as given after childbirth to constrict blood vessels, so allowing for vasoconstriction to minimize the risk of hemorrhage. And know that you still have to deliver the placenta. And so here you're seeing, as far as that connection between the hypothalamus via this pituitary stalk, the infundibulum, and the neurohypophysis. And so you're going to have ADH and oxytocin being released from the neurohypophysis, but produced in the hypothalamus. Okay. I believe, let's see what we have here. Give me one moment here. I think I've given you a lot of information tonight, and I don't want to overwhelm you. I'm going to stop here for this evening, folks. And I'm going to see, I'll just stop sharing, but I'll see, and I know I've been asked this if I could. Does anybody have any questions, any comments before I stop recording? Okay, then I'll stop recording.